for 30,000 years, the covenant of silent stars had kept the galaxy at peace. It was not peace born of friendship, nor of shared purpose, nor of any real trust between the 11 founding species who had signed it in the smoking aftermath of the Cataclysm War. A conflict so devastating that it had reduced entire star systems to lifeless slag, and convinced even the most warlike civilizations among the stars that another war on that scale would end everyone, victor and vanquished alike. The covenant was peace born of terror, codified into treaty, enforced by mutual deterrence so absolute that no species in 30,000 years had dared test its limits. Humanity had joined the covenant relatively recently, by galactic standards, a mere 1100 years ago, when Earth's first-generation ships finally made contact with the wider community of civilized worlds. In that time, humans had earned a reputation the older species found difficult to categorize. Not the most powerful species in the covenant, not the wealthiest, not the most technologically advanced, but consistently, unnervingly calm in the face of situations that reduced other species to panic. The Zerath Ascendancy had watched humanity for 3 centuries, cataloging this trait with growing fascination, and, eventually, a conclusion that would prove to be one of the most catastrophic misjudgments in the Ascendancy's 4,000-year history. They do not panic because they have never faced true danger, Fleet Marshal Korath Ven told the Ascendancy's War Council, presenting his case for what would become the single most consequential decision in Zerath history. Their calm is the calm of a species, sheltered by the Covenant's protections, never having tested what lies beneath their composure. I propose we test it. The Zerath Ascendancy had joined the Covenant 8,000 years before humanity's arrival, and in that time, had grown restless in ways the Covenant's aging enforcement mechanisms were poorly equipped to address. Their homeworld, Zerathis Prime, had grown crowded, their expansion into unclaimed space, constrained by treaty boundaries that felt, to an increasingly vocal faction within Zerath leadership, less like protection, and more like a cage. Korath Ven had spent decades, building support, for a singular, audacious proposition, that the Covenant's 30,000-year peace had grown brittle with age. Its member species soft and complacent, and that a decisive strike against the newest, least battle-tested member of the Covenant would demonstrate, to the Zerath people and to the galaxy at large, that the old order's time had ended. Humanity was the obvious target. Young, isolated, possessing a single home system and a handful of colonies, none of them heavily defended by Covenant standards. Every intelligence report the Ascendancy had gathered suggested a species that talked constantly of peace, cooperation, and diplomatic solutions, values Korath Ven interpreted, with the confidence of a commander who had never once needed to test his assumptions, as evidence of weakness rather than restraint. We are not declaring war on the Covenant, Ven told his council, carefully threading the political needle that would allow the Ascendancy to act without triggering the mutual defense clauses that had kept the peace for 30 millennia. We are exercising a border dispute against a single member species over territory humanity has occupied without proper historical claim. The Covenant's own charter permits bilateral conflicts of this nature. By the time the other member species finish debating whether to intervene, Earth's outer colonies will already belong to the Ascendancy. It was, on paper, a legally defensible maneuver. A war fought through the Covenant's own loopholes rather than against its explicit protections. And it might have worked exactly as Ven intended, had he correctly understood the species he had chosen to test. He did not. The declaration of war reached Earth on a quiet Thursday morning, delivered through the same formal diplomatic channels the Covenant had used for 30,000 years to manage disputes between member species. A lengthy, ceremonial document citing historical grievances, disputed territorial claims, and a demand that humanity cede its 3 outermost colonies within the Kepler 442 system, or face what the document, euphemistically termed, corrective military action. President Sarah Okafor read the declaration twice before setting it down on her desk, then turned to the assembled members of Earth's Unified Defense Council, with an expression that, to the Zerath diplomatic attaché watching remotely through official channels, registered as something disappointingly close to boredom. They want Kepler 442, she said. Admiral James Chen, Supreme Commander of Earth's Combined Fleet, glanced up from his own copy of the declaration. They want a fight they think they can win quickly, using a legal technicality that keeps the rest of the Covenant out of it. Long enough to establish facts on the ground, Kepler 442 is just the opening move. Do we contest the legal technicality? We could. Chen said. It would take the Covenant Arbitration Council 18 months to rule, during which the Zerath fleet would have ample time to seize the colonies anyway, and simply argue possession after the fact. No, Madam President. If they want a war, legally sanctioned or not, I'd rather fight it on our terms than argue about it in a courtroom 4 light years from the actual colonists, whose lives are at stake. Okafor studied the declaration one final time. How long do we have? Their fleet will reach Kepler 442 in approximately 11 days, based on their published mobilization patterns, sir. Then let's not waste any of them, Okafor said, and signed the authorization that would mobilize Earth's combined fleet for the first, true, interstellar conflict humanity had faced since joining the Covenant. What struck every Zerath observer monitoring Earth's response over the following days was not fear, nor panic, nor the frantic diplomatic scrambling their models had predicted from a species facing its first real war. It was, instead, a kind of grim, efficient calm that Fleet Marshal Venn found, upon reviewing the intelligence reports, quietly unsettling in a way he struggled to articulate even to himself. They are not behaving as a frightened species should, his intelligence officer, Dasa Kelith, reported. Public broadcasts show no evidence of civil unrest. Military mobilization is proceeding with unusual efficiency. Their government has not requested Covenant mediation, nor sought alliance support from other member species. They are alone and outmatched, Venn said. Of course they show no evidence of seeking help. There is none to seek in time. Perhaps, Kelith said. Or perhaps, Marshal, they simply do not believe they require it. Humanity's combined fleet that assembled at Kepler 442 numbered 41 vessels, a fraction of the Zerath Ascendancy's deployed force of 118 ships. A disparity that, by any conventional measure of military calculation, should have guaranteed a swift and decisive Zerath victory. What Fleet Marshal Venn's intelligence reports had failed to fully convey, however, was the particular character of the fleet humanity had assembled, or the 1100 years of quiet, deliberate preparation that had gone into building it. Humanity, aware from the earliest days of Covenant membership that its position as the youngest and least established species carried inherent vulnerability, had spent over a millennium developing, not the largest fleet in the galaxy, nor the most individually powerful, but the most relentlessly, obsessively well-trained. Every human naval officer, from the newest ensign to Admiral Chen himself, trained in continuous, brutal simulation cycles that ran without pause, modeling scenarios far more dire than anything the Covenant's long peace had ever produced in reality. Where other Covenant species had grown comfortable across 30,000 years of peace, their militaries maintained more as ceremonial institutions than functional forces. Humanity had never fully believed the peace would last, and had built its entire military doctrine around the assumption that one day it would need to fight outnumbered, outgunned, and entirely alone. The battle at Kepler 442 began with the Zerath fleet advancing in the same confident, methodical formation that had served the Ascendancy in 3 prior border conflicts against lesser powers. Formations built around overwhelming numerical superiority, expecting an enemy that would either retreat in the face of impossible odds or fight a conventional, predictable engagement that superior numbers would inevitably win. Admiral Chen's fleet did neither. "They're not holding position," Kelith reported to Venn, watching the human fleet break into a dispersed, aggressive formation that made sense according to any conventional naval doctrine in the Ascendancy's extensive database. "They're advancing directly into our formation, Marshal. All 41 vessels, converging on our command cluster. They mean to trade their entire fleet for our command ships," Venn said, understanding the strategy immediately, even as he struggled to believe any commander would attempt something so audacious against nearly triple their numbers. "Reinforce the central cluster. Do not let them." The order came too late. Human vessels, moving with a coordinated precision that suggested years, not weeks, of preparation for exactly this engagement. Executed a series of rapid, staggered strikes, designed not to destroy the Zerath fleet's numbers, but to systematically dismantle its command structure. Striking communication relays, flagship escorts, and coordination nodes with a focus that revealed, in hindsight, exactly how thoroughly humanity's intelligence services had studied Zerath military doctrine in the decades leading up to this moment. Within 3 hours, the Zerath fleet, still numerically superior by a wide margin, found itself unable to coordinate effectively at all, its component squadrons reduced to fighting as isolated units against an enemy that had trained specifically for exactly this kind of chaotic, decentralized engagement. By the 6th hour, Fleet Marshal Ven's own flagship had taken critical damage, and the Ascendancy's proud fleet, which had entered the battle, expecting an easy demonstration of Zerath's superiority, was fighting a desperate, disorganized retreat against an enemy less than half its size. The war, when the history books came to write of it, lasted only 16 days. A brief and bloody conflict by galactic standards, but one that reshaped the balance of power within the Covenant of Silent Stars, more profoundly than any single event in the 30,000 years since its founding. Humanity did not stop at defending Kepler 442. In the war's final week, Admiral Chen's fleet, reinforced by newly commissioned vessels, rushed from Earth's shipyards, pushed the offensive directly into contested border space, forcing the Zerath Ascendancy into a position where continuing the war risked not merely losing a border dispute, but losing military assets the Ascendancies could not afford to sacrifice for a conflict that had, by every measure, gone catastrophically wrong. The Zerath Ascendancy's formal surrender, delivered through the same ceremonial covenant channels that had carried its declaration of war 16 days earlier, arrived on Earth on another quiet Thursday morning, and President Okafor read it with the same measured calm she had shown the war's opening declaration. "They're requesting covenant mediation for the peace terms," she said, reviewing the document with her defense counsel. "And a formal acknowledgement that this conflict does not represent a broader breakdown of the covenant's principles. They want to pretend this was an isolated incident," Chen observed, "a border dispute that simply escalated further than intended." "Do we let them?" Chen considered the question carefully before answering. "I think, Madam President, we let the rest of the covenant draw its own conclusions. We didn't seek this war. We didn't escalate it beyond what defending our people required, and we didn't panic, not for a single day, when a species 8,000 years, our senior decided we were the easiest target in the galaxy to test." Okafor nodded slowly, understanding the deeper point Chen was making. "Let it be known then, exactly as it happened. No embellishment, no exaggeration. Just the truth of what occurred, and let every species in the Covenant decide for themselves what that truth means about the newest member of their community." In the decades that followed, the Battle of Kepler 442 became a subject of study across every military academy in the Covenant of Silent Stars, analyzed and reanalyzed by species who had, for 30,000 years, assumed that the deterrent power holding their ancient peace together rested entirely on the oldest, largest civilizations among the stars. Fleet Marshal Korath Ven, stripped of his command and living out the remainder of his years in quiet exile from Zerath politics, would later write, in a memoir published shortly before his death, the single passage most frequently quoted by historians studying the war that nearly broke the Covenant's ancient peace. "We believed humanity's calm was the calm of the untested. We were catastrophically wrong. It was the calm of a species that had spent every year, since its arrival among the stars, quietly preparing for exactly the day we chose to test them. They did not flinch, because they had already imagined every version of this war, 1,000 times over, in the long patient dark of their own uncertainty. We gave them a real war to fight. They had already fought it, 1,000 times, in preparation for a day they hoped, but never quite believed, would never come." The Covenant of Silent Stars endured, its 30,000-year peace bent but unbroken, its member species reminded, some for the first time in millennia, that deterrence is not measured by age, or size, or historical dominance, but by the simple, terrifying question of what a species is willing to become, quietly and patiently, in preparation for a war it hopes it will never have to fight? Humanity had answered that question long before the Zerath Ascendancy ever thought to ask it. And in the long dark between the stars, the rest of the galaxy finally understood exactly what that answer meant.